Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Family Matters tonight. Tonight we have Glen Davies with us, and on average, Kiwis are spending 18 hours a week getting their digital fix. Kiwis between 15 and 24 years old are spending a minimum of 6 hours a week accessing the web from their phone. And so tonight we're going to talk to Glen about the dangers of technology, how to fight back. And in this session, we'll be talking about the danger technology poses to our ability to meditate and communicate. And in next week, so we're going to do a two-week session on this one. Next week, we'll be looking at how technology affects our separation from the world. And then Glen's going to share some really practical ways of fighting back to keep ourselves and our families safe. So we're really looking forward to that. So stay tuned for some really practical wisdom from Glen as we get into our discussion. Now, just before we begin again, I want to do a quick Bible reading, and this one comes from Psalm 119, verse 97 and through to 99. Psalm 119 is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. Oh, how I love your law. I meditate on it all day long. Your commands make me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. I have more insight than all my teachers, for I meditate on your statutes. And with that fact that that Kiwis are spending 18 hours a week or 6 hours a week accessing the web on their phone, I think that really sort of says to me that if that's us as an average Kiwi, that really says to me that we should be spending that time meditating on God's word instead of checking our phone.
Yeah.
So, but you're a tech guy, right?
Yeah. So I've been involved in software.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
So I've been a software developer for quite a few years. So I spend even more time than that on computers and on the internet. So I spend at least 40 hours a week glued to a computer screen. And yeah, and then probably a lot more of my spare time than I should. And I think technology has sort of snuck up on us. I don't consider myself sort of an expert in this area, and the bit of research I've done and the couple of talks I've done on it came out of some discussions we had at some Bible school meetings, because brethren were sort of saying that we think there's a bit of an issue here because people are brethren are getting way too absorbed in technology, and we think there's a potential impact there on our lives as disciples of Christ. And in some ways it's peculiar because like we were baptized about 25 years ago, and when we first came into the truth, the majority of Christadelphians would say we would never have a television in our house because it lets the world into your house. Why would you want the world in your living room? And somehow the internet has come in through the back door. We had the front door closed to the television, and the back door was wide open, and the internet's come on in.
Yeah.
Probably because there are sort of legitimate reasons why you might need a laptop, particularly if you're like me and that's part of your job. And these days, the internet's needed even just to pay bills. So we're at a point where it would be difficult for a lot of people to say we're not having this in our house in the same way that we did with television.
Yeah.
But I think we're at a point where we all need to actually sit back and actually look afresh at where we are and what we're doing with technology, and actually ask that question: is this the best use of my time if I'm a disciple of Christ and wanting to mold myself to be like Christ? So based on some of those discussions, I did a bit of research, and plus also based on the fact that acknowledged in my own life that technology was playing too big a part. And
So you've had that issue. You've experienced what the rest of us are going through, where technology just takes over.
Oh, it's just and I've probably had a smartphone for longer than most people. I think I got an iPhone in 2008, which was probably 4 or 5 years before smartphones became big in the general public. So I've had a few more years to become addicted to it. And just that in the general screen use, just noticing how my attention level had just really vanished. It was really hard to focus and concentrate. I used to, particularly when we first came into the truth, I was an avid reader. I used to read loads of books. And then sometime in the 2000s, I just stopped reading altogether, really. And if I did sit down with a book, I could read like a page or two, and I'd just get sick of it and put it down and go off and do something else.
So you think that was a result of all the technology you're using?
Oh, I think so, yeah. And since then, there's a huge amount of research coming out from people in the world, basically indicating that technology is making us a distracted generation, that it's removing our ability to focus and concentrate. So it's not just us as Christians and a strange bunch of anti-technologists thinking this, that there are technologists in the world that are thinking the same things.
So you've identified distraction being one of the key features that affects our faith. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, well, that was one thing that sort of really struck me when I sat down to do a series of talks for the last summer school on the effect of technology and trying to identify what are the threats from technology. And that verse you read just really highlights the importance of the ability to meditate, to sit down quietly and spend a large amount of undistracted time just focusing on the Word of God, and taking the Word of God into us and memorizing it. And really, technology is designed is making us the complete opposite, that we just drift from one thing to another. And really, ultimately, as disciples of Christ, our idea is to develop the mind of Christ. And the only way to do that is to take God's word into our mind and to meditate on it and chew it over and to be able to really read deeply and meditate deeply. And so there's some pretty interesting statistics, like, and the things I'll sort of mention here all come from peer-reviewed scientific journals. So these things I'm mentioning aren't just the odd person's hearsay. This is people have done serious research and had it peer-reviewed. 75% of screen content is viewed for less than 1 minute. And one study showed that people switch between different content when they're on a screen, switch between different content every 19 seconds.
Wow, that's significant.
Yeah.
And they've done analysis to show that you actually experience like a neurological high when you switch. So when you see a hyperlink on a web page, as you click on it, you get a little dopamine hit. So your brain gets trained not to be actually reading the content and taking it in, but actually spotting a link to something else. The excitement comes from clicking on the link and going to the next page, rather than actually taking and absorbing what's on the current page.
So yeah, the excitement comes from rather than from the absorption of the information, it's coming from the excitement of a journey to who knows where.
Yeah, so there might be something really exciting at the end of this link. So I won't get too engrossed in this particular bit. And yeah, the brain starts to get molded to that way of operating. So sitting down with a book and just reading a plain old page where you can't actually click on a link, the only option you've got is to turn it and go to the next page. Or if you like some people, you can flip to the end and see how it ends if you want to. But
yeah. I can see how it really does take us away from being able to focus just on reading for the sake of reading and following it through.
Yeah, and some other research showed that the average time that you can stay focused on a computer is 40 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So it's the whole technology world is pushing us towards this, just skimming across the surface, never actually really taking anything in and thinking deeply on it.
So if people have focused so far, those who are watching, you've actually done quite well, because you've done it for 14 minutes so far. Congratulations. Yeah.
And the trouble is that the big companies that make all their money out the internet, like Google, for instance, they really want you to keep moving, because the more web pages you view, the more ads you view, and the more potential is that you'll click on an ad, so the more money they make. So they don't want you to bring up an article and spend an hour reading it and thinking about it and mulling it over and meditating on it. They want you to spend a maximum a minute and then move on to the next one, which has got more ads on it. Yeah. And you'll see a lot of web pages designed like that. They'll have the clickbait, a little enticing headline. You'll never guess what happened next. And of course, you click on it to find out what happened next, and they'll give you a tiny little tidbit, and then you'll scroll down and there'll be a button to say, click on this to find out what happened next, and you'll go to another page. And it turns out that nothing really happened next at all. But you've clicked on 10 links and seen 20 adverts in the process.
Oh yeah, I've certainly been sucked into that one.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you consider that you're spending large portions of your time just doing that, like, in what way is that helping us become like Christ?
Yeah.
I mean, sure, it's okay to chill out every now and again and just catch up on a bit of news and read a few funny articles, but the brain gets trapped into this process of just following these links. Oh, just click on this next link, and suddenly an hour's gone past, or an hour and a half, or 2 hours. And
yeah.
You were telling us the other day about some really interesting research about mice. Is it mice? Mice, yeah. And the rewards, the click rewards.
A lot of the applications are designed to basically be addictive. And there was a scientist in the 1950s called Skinner, or a psychologist. He was trying to work out how to make students be more willing to learn. So he did some experiments on mice, and he worked out that if you gave them the same reward at the same time by clicking on a lever, it sort of worked okay. But if you gave them a random sized reward at a random time when they clicked on the lever, they became addicted to clicking on the lever. And he realized that humans were exactly the same, that if you give humans a random reward, randomly spaced apart, they become addicted to that. And it's all to do with the dopamine again. The brain gets this dopamine hit when you get the reward, and you get more of a dopamine hit when you don't know what the reward's going to be, or if there is going to be a reward at all. So a lot of apps that you have on your phone, particularly games and things, they've followed the research of this guy Skinner to basically addict us. So one-armed bandits work the same. Sometimes you get nothing, sometimes you get a little reward, and sometimes you get a big reward. And that random nature is what is addictive. And application developers have picked that up and run with it.
Okay.
There was a psychologist that wrote a book for app developers on how to make your apps addictive, and a lot of them have picked that up. So that's why you'll find that if you've got a game on your phone, it can be one of the reasons it's addictive is because you'll be wanting to get your little reward, and you may not be sure with a little bit elusive. Yeah. And email's sort of similar, because you check your email, there might be a really exciting message there, or there might be nothing at all, or there might be something that's just a little bit interesting. So it's tempting to just keep going back and checking your email because you're not sure what's going to be there.
Yeah.
Yep, I've
Yeah,
certainly
I
done
do
that.
that. I'm sure a lot of people do. Hopefully it's not just us.
Yeah, and it comes back to exactly the same thing with the mice. And it really hit me when I saw that the fact that we behave exactly the same as mice do in relation to this. And if that's the case, it has to be the carnal mind that is driving it, because of course mice don't have a spiritual mind. Well, I'm pretty sure they don't.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yep.
Well, maybe except for Stuart Little, of course, but so really, if we're being driven by technology to just waste our time doing these things, then it's the carnal mind that's in control.
Mm.
Whereas the Father's told us we're supposed to have dominion over the carnal mind. So it gives us pause for thought to say, which part of me is driving this behavior?
Yeah. So if we're addicted to clicks, and we're desperate to check our emails, or we've got that game on our phone that we're playing with, how would you recommend, or what would you say to regain our minds? How would you recommend to regain our minds for Christ? If we've got this addiction.
Well, as far as the phone goes, like one of the key things is seems like you've actually got to leave it out of the room. Because yes, some other research showed that the mere presence of a smartphone, even when it's turned off and face down, drains your attention. So an experimental study of several hundred adults showed that both working memory and ability to solve new problems would drastically reduce when their phones were turned off but present on their desks, as opposed to being in another room. So part of the solution, I think, is basically putting your phone in another room.
Yep.
And I know some brethren, they have a policy in their house that the phone is really useful when you're out and about for contacting each other, but you don't actually really need it when you're in the house. So when you come back home, you put your phone on a cupboard in the entranceway, and it stays there.
Okay.
Which that
so
maybe
basically just leaving it alone, getting it out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, and it seems like you literally do have to get it completely out of sight. For some reason, even just having it next to you, even if it's turned off, is distracting.
Okay.
Because it's like you can see.
I've got mine there right now. It's like right in hand's reach. It's just here.
So is a phone a worse form of distraction than the computer itself?
I think it's probably worse in that we've got it with us all the time.
Just more accessible.
Yeah, it's just more accessible, and you're just used to it's there in your pocket. Whereas it's a laptop's more distracting once you've sat down with it and got it open and you've started on one YouTube video. And of course, again, the technology companies, they know what they're doing because they recommend things based on what you've already watched the most of. So when you start watching your YouTube video, there's a list of really great ones that sound really appealing to you down the right-hand side, because they know what's going to appeal to you based on what you watched yesterday. And it's like, oh, that one looks really good. I just watched that. And then, of course, there's another new list of really interesting ones.
Yeah.
And they gradually refine that until they've got you on a hook, basically.
Yeah, they know. They work out what you like, and they'll just keep showing you stuff that's bound to appeal to you. So it's
So what do you think it is that drives our need for distraction?
Well, that was another interesting bit of research I came across. Well, one researcher that was looking into it, his view was, and he's not a Christadelphian, his view was that it's not necessarily that the trouble with the technology. Part of the trouble is that we want to be distracted, and that a lot of cases people have a lot of issues that they're dealing with and struggling with, and technology is really good at numbing the mind from those things. So if you're suffering from severe anxiety, or you've got a there's trouble in your marriage or whatever problem you have, then if you sit down and watch YouTube videos, your mind turns off to those things. Like, it's really good at, like, as television always has been, it's a great way to turn your brain off.
Yeah.
I must try and find the research, but I'm sure there's some research which shows there's less brain activity watching TV than there is when you're sleeping.
I have heard that. Yeah.
So, I mean, YouTube videos are no different. So if you're just watching Netflix or YouTube, then there's no brain activity going on. You've just basically switched off and you're blobbing out, which can be a good way to get over, to forget about your problems for a little while.
Yeah.
And
so the more we do this, does it train our brain even more to want this distraction, so that we find it harder to get deep into reading and meditation?
I think it's like anything, isn't it? Things become habits, and then once they're a habit, it's more of a struggle to break it. And I think part of the challenge is, like, it's all very well to say, oh, that's right, we need to get this evil out of our house and we're going to cut it off completely and we're going to get rid of it. But then if it is the case that you've been using it to distract you from some issue that you don't want to deal with, then if you cut that off, then if you still don't deal with those issues, then maybe you're going to pick up something else, a bit like the parable of the man that swept his house and then 7 spirits far worse came in.
Yeah. We'll find some other form of distraction.
Yeah. If we just say, well, I'm going to get rid of technology, but you don't look at the underlying issues of why it was that you were wasting so much time on it, then maybe there might be a worse thing that you take up as a habit.
Yeah. So as far as training the brain goes, you mentioned another interesting piece of research about learning the piano.
Oh, yeah, that was in relation to how like how things affect our brain, and that the research showed they took 2 different groups of people, and one of them they gave the whole lot basic piano lessons, and then one group they got to actually keep playing on the keyboard, and the other group they got to just imagine that they were playing on the keyboard. And those that just imagined they were playing on the keyboard had the same brain development over a several week period as the people that actually touched the keyboard. So it was just sort of an interesting bit of research to show that basically we become what we think about.
Wow.
And when you look at scripture, it's quite amazing when it's talking about developing the mind of Christ. It's not some amorphous thing. It's like a physical reshaping of your brain. Which
goes to show what you've been saying, where we meditate, we need to meditate on the scripture and use that and have undistracted time to be able to do that.
Yeah, and one thing I've got back to doing is actually reading, and it took a little while to get back into it, but actually sitting down and reading books. Because when you read a book, you follow a line of thought from one end to the other. And then your brain plays around with that and works on it. And then you'll read another book and you'll make connections between those books you've read plus the scripture that you've been reading. And that somehow works in your brain. And that's part of meditating, isn't it? It's taking all of those things and thinking about, well, how does that impact me? What does that mean in terms of my life and how I'm living?
Yeah.
Whereas if we're just on the internet and skimming from one thing to the other, never actually really taking anything in, we've got nothing to chew over. We're not chewing the cud at all, which is the lesson from the clean animals, isn't it? Yeah.
I found this really fascinating, what you've been talking about with the whole distraction thing, because it's not something I really thought of to that extent, how much it really impacts us and changes our ability or desire to want to think deeper and read deeper. So that was just really fascinating. I found that
Yeah, the thing that I find really interesting is the number of people in the world that are worried about it.
Yes.
So in general, most people in the world will eat, drink, and be merry. So, like, who cares if you're not developing a brain that can think deeply? But yeah, there's a reasonable amount of concern, and there's some interesting, like some of the CEOs of the big technology companies don't allow technology in their home, and they send their children to schools that don't have technology.
Oh wow.
Because they know the impact that technology is actually having on us, and they don't want that impact on their children. But they're happy to run billion-dollar companies which take advantage of everybody else's brains.
Everyone else.
Yeah.
So
tell us about the second danger to our faith that you've been we chatted about, and that's about communication.
Yeah, because I think one of the other key things about being a disciple of Christ is that ability to build each other up in the faith and have empathy and relate to each other and have love one towards another. And some of you will and some of you won't have read online discussion forums with Christadelphians. And that's not unique to Christadelphians, but online discussion is very rarely is an uplifting place to go. It seems like it's really easy for people to resort to a character assassination and being really nasty and curt with each other. And I read one book by, a worldly psychologist, and he's done a lot of research which indicates that for some reason, when people communicate online, they become much more aggressive. They lose a lot of their empathy and really resort largely to character assassination rather than having
a reason.
Building, yeah.
A reasoned discussion, yeah.
Yeah, and it can be a bit sort of faith destroying and a bit soul destroying when you log into an online Christadelphian discussion forum and see the way that brethren are talking to each other, and you sort of think,
I can imagine. Yeah.
Look, who are we if this is how we can talk to each other? Have we actually got the truth if that's how we relate to each other? But I think it's not necessarily the way people would normally relate to each other. There's just something about this online context. And there was, again, the research, where is it? Yeah, so some research showed that when encountering someone with an opposing political viewpoint, people are more likely to judge them as warm and intelligent if they hear that person's ideas spoken rather than written down. And unfortunately, many social media platforms are currently designed to focus on text, reducing the chance of genuine discussion and debate. And it's, you hear some of those, you read some of those comments online, you think I'm sure they wouldn't talk like that to each other if they were at the hall face to face after a Bible class. And,
and the other thing too with that sort of that written communication is that it's all, well, as we were talking about before, brief, short, to the point, and you don't get the feeling or the emotion or the explanation behind it that you might if you were face to face. And you can read someone else's body language or whatever else, whatever other communication cues you get.
Yeah, last time we talked, I mentioned that I'm by nature a very sarcastic and cynical person, and which you can usually pick up by my tone of voice if I'm actually talking to you. But in an email, you don't know that. So I've unfortunately personally upset a few people because I've sent what I thought was a sort of humorous and sarcastic comment, but they've taken it at face value. But you just don't have those cues. And the speed thing's an issue too, because you can, in the heat of the moment, you can quickly type up an email and go, hit the send, and well, let's show them, let them answer that. And then usually as soon as you hit send, you've thought, oh, maybe that was a bit blunt.
Yeah.
something I started doing is if it was a slightly heated discussion, and I'd immediately felt riled up by what somebody had emailed me, is to type up the response in a note page rather than in the email. Type up my heated response, which completely destroyed their argument, and then just save it to my desktop and go to bed.
Yep.
And mostly by the next day, you realise that you didn't need to send it.
Right.
You just delete it. Yeah. And
Mm.
it's really easy to delete it without sending it than it is to have to ring the person up and say, look, I'm really sorry about what I said in that email. I was heated up and I really should have thought a bit more about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good advice.
Yeah. And yeah, interestingly, it's our Arranging Brethren's group sort of came to a similar conclusion, because we were having a few discussions about various matters, and you'd end up with a really long email that'd just go bounce around with brothers adding their 2 cents worth in, and getting more heated and more heated. And then once you actually came together at meet face to face, it turned out, well, you're all saying the same thing anyway, just using different words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we came to an agreement that we wouldn't use email for discussing important matters. We would only use email for really quick matters of arrangement, like we need to fill in for a reader next Sunday, or the meeting needs to be at a different time. But anything more difficult than that can mostly wait till a face-to-face meeting.
Mm.
Yep.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very wise.
But I think the other issue with relationships is, again, just largely the phones, is just the fact that it can become an impediment between people, or just it's something that actually gets in the way. I mean, I'm sure everybody's experienced having a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden they just completely cut you off, take their phone out, oh, just a minute, and check a message and answer it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Or even, I mean, the really typical example you see is a couple having a romantic date, and both of them are on their phones and facing each other, and there's no communication going on at all. Yeah, and it's really sad.
Yeah, and again, just some other research showed that just the presence of a mobile phone can disrupt connections between two people, leading to reduced feelings of empathy, trust, and a sense of closeness.
Okay.
And 50% of parents reported that mobile devices typically interrupted the time they spent with their children 3 or more times each day.
Wow.
Mm.
So it's sort of crept in, and it is having an effect on us that perhaps we don't always acknowledge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there aren't necessarily quick and easy answers, but I think, and different things will work for different people depending on their situation, but I think it's just well worth us all just taking the time to sit back and think, right, what impact is this technology having on me personally, on my relationships and on my family, and what are some of the things I could do to change that if there is an issue.
Because it's very significant, and as you've mentioned, it's crept in on us, and often in ways that we've just really got no idea about how it's impacted us. But like the slow boil of the, you put the frog in water and bring it slowly to the boil. You just don't notice it.
Yeah, that's quite a good analogy, actually. Yeah, I think, and definitely at those Bible school meetings, that was sort of the view of a lot of people, that we'd dropped the ball in some ways.
Yeah.
That it's sort of snuck in and it's just become a bigger and bigger part of our lives. And we haven't taken the time to think, actually, is this a good thing or not?
Yes.
Or if there are some good things about it, how can we segment those and overcome the things that aren't so good?
So how do you think we can do that? Where, like, I know there are some good things, and I'm hoping that Family Matters is one of those. You know, I mean, without the internet, without technology, we wouldn't be able to have this sort of discussion with you. We'd be in our ecclesial hall doing it with half a dozen other people, you know, and it'd be a lot smaller and a lot less, you know, we wouldn't have that expertise. So how can we take the good, how can we maximize the good and minimize the bad? You got any thoughts on that? I don't know, I haven't asked you this before.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, and also just adding to what you've said, I mean, the whole COVID lockdown would have been a lot more depressing if we didn't have like GoToMeeting and Zoom.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's, like I said, you could go the hard line and say, right, that's it, we don't need this, and be like the some religious groups that refuse to have any technology whatsoever. But it does become really difficult to pay your bills and do various other things, and even in terms of children and in terms of their education, sometimes it's hard to avoid it completely. It's a matter of each individual, actually, I think, saying, how is this affecting my walk in the truth? And if I feel it is affecting my walk and that there are better ways I could be spending my time, how do I go about changing the habits I've formed?
Yep.
And some of them maybe just
risks. Yeah, which
Yeah.
I think we'll be talking about more next time, won't we?
Yeah,
Sort of, yeah, ways we can fight back on this.
Yeah, because it's yeah, what we'll look at next week is we can use some technology to help restrict the technology.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Sounds great.
Yep.
Yeah. So in some cases, it's a matter of putting up some walls, just like scriptural times and Hezekiah and the likes, basically strengthening the walls to keep the enemy out. I think we need to do some of that.
Yeah.
But we also, we'll probably look at it a bit next week too, that you can't just trust technology either. You still also need to, we each need to basically build a conscience. Because it's only our conscience that's going to prick us and say, hey, maybe 2.5 hours watching that Netflix movie with some really dubious language and some dubious content, maybe that wasn't the best way to spend 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's only if we're building our conscience and trying to develop our mind like Christ that we'll then start saying, yeah, it filled in 2.5 hours, but I feel really uncomfortable about some of the things I allowed myself to watch.
Yeah.
It's only that conscience that's going to then prick us to say, well, next time I'm not going to watch a movie like that.
Yes.
Maybe I'll find a work of the truth that I'll sit down and really make an effort to read, or maybe I'll go for a walk for an hour and think about and pray to the Father while I'm walking.
Yeah. No, sounds good. Looking forward to that further discussion.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, thank you very much.
I was just going to say, because that last point sort of comes back to that again. If we're just using the technology to escape from the hard things, then it's much easier to sit down with the technology. But sometimes we've got to sit down and actually approach the Father in prayer and say, look, I've got a real struggle in my life. I can't actually cope with these issues. I don't know what to do, and I'm escaping from it by resorting to watching stuff online that just numbs my mind. But I need your help to work out how I can actually confront it.
Yeah. And the same too.
Yeah.
And the same too, if we're finding, like, you know, you're picking up a book or even the Bible and trying to do Bible readings, and you've found that you can't focus anymore because you're so used to these 30-40 second clicks. You know, maybe we just, again, like you say, we need to just sit there and pray and say, Lord, help me to focus.
Yeah, and some of it's a bit like eating the elephant, isn't it? Sort of one bit at a time. So it's like, rather than trying to sit down and read War and Peace or sit down and read Elpis Israel from front to back, say, well, I'm going to read 2 pages of Elpis Israel.
Mm.
Yeah, or maybe just one thinky thing for starters.
Yeah, there's an idea.
So yeah, maybe starting small sometimes and building up.
Yeah, training your mind again in a new way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, let's hope we can all make an effort to do that. And I know what I'm like. I mean, I find like I sit down and read a book, and I'm like, okay, I've read half a chapter. Is it almost over? And I'm flicking over the pages, like, 3 more pages. Do I carry on or not? You know.
Yeah.
But yeah, you do find that with a bit of training, it does perk up, and yeah. So it's something I need to work on. So thank you, Glenn. Really appreciate that.
I guess it's a bit of retraining our appetites in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like all things, the brain's an amazing thing that the Father's blessed us with. With a bit of effort, you can train it to do all sorts of amazing things.
Yeah.
And in particular, training to be like Christ.
Yeah.
Well, it's just been really fascinating. We've really appreciated the research you've put into it, and the the knowledge and the expertise that you've shared, and just bringing us a bit of awareness. So I think it's something even as not as only as individuals, but I think in our ecclesias we probably need to think about how we can address some of these issues too, I would say.
Yeah, and there's the article on Wilderness Voice, which I think, Robert, you were going to email around to people.
Yeah.
For those of you that haven't read it, that's sort of a summary of most of the things I've been saying. Plus, there's quite a good bibliography at the end, so that if you're interested in the research side of all this, then there's a list of a few books there.
I was going to mention that afterwards. So, but you've done that, so that's cool. Yeah, I will put that link up in the chat box during discussion time. So if you're wanting to see that Glenn's article on Wilderness Voice, that'll go up in the chat time thing, and I'll also email it out to anyone who's receiving Family Matters. So thank you very much again, Glen. We've really appreciated your time today. Looking forward to next week when we'll carry on with the discussion and talk about remaining separate and hearing your advice for what we can do practically in our families, how we can build those walls and remove those temptations that we get from the internet. There is a question on the chat box, but we'll talk about that in discussion time. Just before we finish, just let you know what's coming up. 7th of September, which is next week, because it'll be September next week. Spring, yes. For those of us in the Southern Hemisphere, of course. Technology and Internet Safety Part 2 with Glen. So continuing with what technology does for our separation from the world and talking about some really practical ways of fighting back to keep ourselves and our families safe. So yeah, don't miss that one. It'll be really life-changing. So yeah, don't miss it. September the 14th, we'll have a break. September the 21st, Sharon and I will be talking about burnout, and Darren and Josie Horrell will be hosting that one for us. And on the 28th of September, we have a break. And then on the 5th of October, we're going to be talking about Guard Your Heart. And our special guest that week will be Jeff Watson. So looking forward to that one too.